This is a download from BFM89.9, the business station.
Good morning, it's just gone past 9:30 a.m. and as we do every Friday, we have the Property Show with me, Sharad Kutan and Azura Rahman. And today on the show, we are on the topic of interior design.
Well, to be more exact, Sharad, it's about designing according to your personality, which is a bit of an interesting concept when you think about it, because I normally associate interior design with themes and concepts, as opposed to it being a personality showcase.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess it has a lot to do with with confidence and how confident you are in asserting your personality in your surroundings.
Or do you just give in to whatever the interior designer has planned for you, right? And end up with something quite bland or quite samey. Well, so I explored this with Joann Ang from Design Associates, or DDA. And it's an ID firm from Singapore who's also been responsible for some high-profile projects in KL, such as Menara Troika.
Well, let's take a listen then.
I think it's a mix of both. I think to a certain extent, because how we work in DDA is we always try to see that each individual or each project is unique on its own, and that in itself is always driven by the person, the owner. So if it is for a home, then it's always about the personal preferences, liking, and things like that. And if it's for commercial projects, then usually if the owner is the sole decision maker, then again it is about his likes and dislikes. So I think it's very much in that angle that we're looking at whenever we talk about
the thing is, when it comes to any creative partnership, there's always I guess there's a bit of collaboration between the client and, of course, you, the experts. How much of a project normally is your contribution, and how much of it is, the client's contribution?
Interesting question. I would think it's an equal portion in that sense, because, well, first and foremost, whenever we enter into a project, we always try to see how we can put in our fair bit of experiences and what we know, and how we can bring about solutions. It could be an inherent problem to a space, or it could be something that they trying to make a profit out of it. So if it is from a commercial point of view, it is always driven by profit. It's about brand recognition. It's about brand definition. And if it is for a home, then the personal habits will come into place.
Right.
And very often these things may not be very obvious to the owner, and it is something that as designers we probably need to try and probe and find out, in the midst of working through.
So it's a consultative process in that sense then, Joann?
Yes, that's always the case. Very, very rarely do we come across clients who already know what they want right from the beginning. And sometimes, surprisingly, they thought they know what they want, but at the end of the day, we were able to surprise them with something, even better and more interesting than what they have thought about in the first place.
In terms of interior design, though, do you find that that there is, when someone consults you and they give you carte blanche, for example, is it something that you prefer, or when we're talking about personality, is it something that you would prefer to have the client's unique personality injected into the project?
Yes, I think that can actually make a huge difference to every project in that sense, because every individual is unique. So with that, if we're able to size them up and work that into the design, that itself actually it's very valuable in making that particular project different from what we've done before.
Now, I imagine that your clients that come up to you, Joann, also know that you have a particular look in place, looking at the past projects that you've done. I mean, for those living in Malaysia, obviously Troika would be the most familiar one, for example. What are the kind of design facets could someone expect from someone who's working with DDA in that sense? Do you have a signature look?
No, in fact, we try to avoid that. We try to avoid working with a particular formula or a particular style. In the sense, precisely because we want to make sure that every project is different and look different at the end of the day. So I suppose if the client, whenever they come to us, they bring to them, they're willing to open up and share about their likes and dislikes and preferences and all. I think we are fairly capable of working it out in such a way that it actually looks different at the end of the day.
I mean, there's always a danger of when you use an interior designer where everything kind of looks the same from one project to the other, isn't it? And that's exactly what you're trying to avoid.
Yes, exactly.
That blandness, so to speak. The thing is, though, Joann, I do find that there is a rising consciousness for good design amongst homeowners. Is there really still a place or a value for interior designers in that sense, then, or when people can just do things on their own or look at magazines, for example?
I think, in a sense, definitely. I suppose you're asking whether or not people could actually explore designing homes themselves. Well, I suppose if you're talking about home per se, I find that it is fast becoming more than just a place where you go back at the end of the day. For someone who's an extrovert, he's probably using it as a place to entertain and socialize with friends. And then again, for someone, he's using it as a workplace. So with this multiple role that the home has to play, I think it's very essential to make sure that you get it right in the first place, right from the beginning. And especially with our homes getting smaller and property prices getting higher, both Singapore and Malaysia is the same. It is almost crucial to make sure that the interior is well thought out, both functionally and aesthetically, right from the start. So hiring a professional would actually make a huge difference, and it also avoid the owner making expensive mistakes along the way.
Have you encountered those such mistakes where basically people just do things much more on an ad hoc basis without taking into consideration what's the purpose of the home in the first place?
Yes, definitely. In fact, we have clients who come to us and say that, I've been shopping and I kind of like these Persian rugs and that I've ordered Persian rugs and only to realize that it may not go very well with this particular green wallpaper print that I have gotten along the way. So I think people tend to be impulsive, especially when you're excited about your new place and you tend to go shopping, not having the big picture, the macro view in mind. And I think that's where interior designers would come in and give the value add, because we will have a methodology to work things through systematically,
right,
and helping you to size up initially the concept and then followed by what to put in there, right down from material selection to color scheme to even lightings. And then we also talk about how a special feature within the wall and how it's about how you feel within the space. We focus on how you feel within the space, what you see in the morning until the sunset and things like that. So it's a lot more than trying to buy things along the way as when you feel like it,
Okay. Now, the thing is, what about heritage when it comes to good design? Do you take into consideration the locale of your project? Does it seem incongruous to you as a designer, for example, to have a very Baroque style interior when you are based in the tropics, for example? Would you go down that route?
Heritage is definitely important as far as interior design is concerned. I think that pretty much determines who you are and where you came from. But applying it in a modern interior space, I think that's always the challenge. And of course, along the way, trying to put into consideration who the users are, how they're going to make use of the space is definitely crucial. Whether or not you want to apply Baroque style when you are living in a tropical country, I think probably it's a very difficult question to answer in a sense.
You're straining as it is.
Yes, I am. Well, I think it's about what you want to bring into the space. How much of the heritage do you want to retain within that space itself? For us to understand, to have a better understanding about the client is very important.
Now, you mentioned good modern design, and that's something what everyone's trying to strive for anyway, in one way or another. Without having a signature style, though, do you have certain hallmarks? Do you have certain flourishes that shows that that you are trying to achieve good modern design for your clients? Does it mean having another Eames chair amongst the interiors? What does it mean to you, good modern design?
Perhaps the answer, it's not about wanting to be different for the sake of difference, for the sake of being different, but rather for the space to relate, to be relevant, whatever project it is, whether it's a commercial project or it's a residential project. I think that's going to make the difference, rather than having a very signature, iconic piece within the space. It is probably more challenging for us to work through the process and find the answer. And very often that style actually comes through during the process of working it through. Very often we have our client coming back to us to say, it is actually quite surprising that we're actually able to put together something which is pretty stylish. It wasn't something that they could see from a magazine or off a particular image that they can find in a magazine. And I think that is a compliment to us, wanting not to follow a particular style.
Now, talking about designing based on personalities, do you find any similarities or differences between your clients in Singapore and Malaysia, for example? Is there a different look or a different scene altogether when it comes to the interior design in the two different countries?
Definitely, to a certain extent, there is a difference. Based on this brief experience I have with Malaysia, which is still just a period of 3 to 4 years, I realize there's a lot more varieties over here in Malaysia, probably due to the cultural richness as compared to what we have back home. At the same time, I think people are also a lot more receptive towards new ideas over here, and they're also beginning to see a great value add in terms of design. Whereas in Singapore, we are constantly changing, constantly wanting to refine what is already there, but then very often they're being restricted by guidelines and regulations and all that. So that actually impacts what we can achieve at the end of the day.
Yeah. And somehow perhaps makes you more creative working within such guidelines in that sense.
Creativity, yes, because you actually have to break all these constraints and red tapes in that sense. One of the challenges that Singaporeans and Malaysians are facing these days is because of the small apartments. Basically, sizes are reducing from a typical 1,200, 1,500 square feet down to 600 square feet. And I think a well-designed interior, it's probably one that can help to transform a 700 square feet space to something that is as good as 1,200 square feet.
Right.
By ways of doing clever tricks, say having a detailing of fold-up beds, or even a clever storage that has a dual function, or even a wardrobe that can somehow opens up into a partition or a privacy screen. That would probably be great value add. We were being approached by a developer in Singapore to design a 420 square feet space.
Wow.
To look like 1,000 square feet.
It's called doing a miracle.
It is doing a miracle. So what we then have to is to try to figure a way where the person is going to sleep, because you barely have enough space for a kitchen and a study area and a TV corner. So we ended up having to add a mezzanine level into a 3-meter high ceiling.
Right.
And that requires quite a lot of engineering and thinking and detailing.
Right.
But interestingly, the property was sold out within 3 weeks. So I suppose we kind of do a great job for that.
You pulled the rabbit out of the hat, so to speak.
Probably.
Right. And I imagine also in such situations, lighting becomes very important when you have pokey corners, when you don't have enough light, natural light coming through. That comes into play too.
Yes. And in fact, a very well-lit space can actually look larger than what it actually is. So that itself, actually, it's a great value. And if everyone can start rethinking about how the lighting could affect the interior space, I think that would actually save them quite a lot of money trying to furnish it with expensive furniture.
Okay, Joann, now we can't have an interior designer in our studio without asking some practical tips on home design. What do you find to be a typical oversight when it comes to designing one's home? What's the experience that you've encountered when it comes to typical oversights?
Probably lightings. I think that's probably one particular area where people probably have very little knowledge or probably exposure. But there's a lot we can achieve out of a wonderfully designed lighting. It can actually affect the way you look, from right down to how a piece of artwork can actually present itself.
So given the choice, would you completely ban fluorescent lighting in every home?
Yes, probably. But no, I suppose fluorescent lights has its
purpose.
Purpose as well, for lighting up functional spaces and all.
Okay, lots of interesting tips there from Joann Ang. She's the design director for DDA, talking about designing based on personality. If you missed any bits of this interview at all, don't forget to download our podcast from www.bfm.my.
So, lighting seems to be the mantra when it comes to interior design.
That's how location seems to be for property, right? But I tend to agree with Joann in the sense that I do find that, many homes or public spaces, they can be improved with a bit of a tweak in the lighting department.
Well, no, absolutely. My own apartment, I've learned that, you should have lights going up and lights going down. Multiple lights create volume. They create a sense of space rather than flatness, I think. And typically, fluorescent lighting just flattens everything.
Exactly. So, say no to fluorescent lighting.
Yeah, so I've actually been there. And I've seen how it's transformed my living room just by having a couple more lights pointing in different directions.
Well, Sharad, in case you're looking for another job, I think interior design might be your other calling.
Absolutely. So anyway, we have to move on to property launches this week, for all you property hunters. What have you got for us, Azura?
First up, the rather interestingly named Trallas, that's in Semeneh, developed by City Eco Hills in Berhad. 56 zero-lot bungalows on freehold land built out of 3,194 to just about 3,589 square feet, starting from 1.5 million or so, just to over 2 million. If you've got any spare cash lying around. That brings you to about, actually, a rather affordable 497 to 582 ringgit per square foot.
Interesting. I love these names because they somehow have to deal with the actual location. So it's Trallas in Semeneh. And you're thinking, foreign workers, deport, tortured immigrants. I don't know. What else do you think?
It's called regeneration, Sharad.
Okay, there's also Nottingham University there, I guess. But anyway, so the other property we have is Riverville Residences in Taman Sri Sentosa, Oaklang Road, Kuala Lumpur. It's developed by Alzac Viva Sdn Bhd with some 473 condo units on freehold land. It has a built-up starting from 1,116 square feet to a rather generous 3,181 square feet. Prices start at merely 538,000 to some 988,000, bringing it roughly to about 492 to 572 per square foot.
Okay, some options there for you.
Well, that's all we have for you today on The Property Show. Catch us again next Friday at 9:30 a.m., just after the news. Next week is our regular legal clinic with Chris Tan of Chur Associates. If you have any legal queries on buying, selling, living, renting property, etc., at inquiries@bfm.my.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.